Chapter 51. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The palace is not completely organized yet. It wasn't enough because it was prepared in a hurry, Prince. Kailas apologized, unable to lift his head as if he had no face. From dinner, I'll prepare properly. I'm sorry, Prince. Even Caitlin, who packed tableware alone, didn't look good because she didn't like Perez's first meal at Poirak Palace to be like this. Perez was still standing in front of a stone tablet in the garden with an unfamiliar face. I was looking at the flowers in the garden, and I was worried at the moment. Still, it's the first meal Perez has at his own new palace, but how would you feel if the food brought was below standard? Point 1. No matter how dull he is, he would be very disappointed. Besides, it was Kailas who went inside the Poirak Palace, which is still being organized, and brought a meal. It's a big deal if I'm disappointed with Kailas, who will have to care for Perez right by his side in the future. What is so messed about? I stopped doing and ran straight to the table. By the way. What? I was honestly surprised. It wasn't because the meal on the table was too messy. Rather, I was surprised that it was too much bread. However, Kailas and Caitlin's thoughts seemed different. I'm more sorry for my reaction, and I can see it with my head down. I'm sorry, my lady. If you don't like it too much, once you're eating this food, we'll go to the Imperial Palace and bring more proper food. Looking at the expressions of the two, this wasn't a joke, it was sincere. It's much better than I thought. Isn't that right, Perez? When I asked him, Perez nodded a little. The lunch Kailas prepares is a sandwich topped with red jam, a salad with lots of fresh fruit, a grilled chicken dish in a sweet sauce, and roasted vegetables cooked together in freshly prepared hot steam. It's full of bread. I don't know what it tastes like yet, but this was a great appetizer for lunch. Even at Lombardy's mansions, of course, there are times when I get a more fancy lunch, but when I ate alone, most of the meals were simple and affordable. I just wanted to ask Kailas. Is your Majesty's lunch much larger than this table setting? Kailas nodded firmly and replied. Your Majesty eats all 3 meals a day in a prepared dinner course. Each time, 3 or more main dishes are prepared to suit his taste, and 4 or more, especially before and after meals. I can't eat all of them. Did you choose the food His Majesty usually likes among them? Yes, that's right. Wow. My house was a lot frugal. Of course, Grandpa hates wasteful food. So naturally, Lombardy's chef cooks a small amount of food with all his heart. Other members of the family are also accustomed to the way they eat. I asked because I wanted to. How about the first prince? When the word of first prince came out, Perez, who couldn't take her eyes off at the prepared food, turned to me. Are you still aware of the competition? The face of the guy looking at me was harder than usual. As far as I know, at the order of Her Majesty Empress, magnificent dinners are prepared each meal. But since he's still young, there must be a lot of wasted food. She said that, because he's growing up, we need to pay more attention to his meals. I heard and knew the Empress' love for her son, but it was truly unusual. I sat down while shaking my head. Perez also looked at me and I took a seat in the chair that Kailas had prepared. I grabbed my fork and knife and rushed towards the chicken dish. There were other pre-dinner foods like salads and sandwiches, but the first one is meat. When I cut the softly cooked chicken and put it in my mouth, I felt a wonderful balance of taste in my mouth. This wasn't bad. 1 piece of meat, 2 salads, and then open the bread before a meal, and after that a large bite with plenty of butter. I'm having such an exciting meal, and Kailas, who stands behind Perez's chair across from me, doesn't look good. I looked at Perez. Why not eat? Perez held a fork in one hand just staring at the food. You don't like the food? The guy shook his head. Then don't you know what to eat first? He shook his head again. Well, maybe. Are you scared of food? Ha. The answering voice is small. But it must have been heard from Kailas and Caitlin's side standing next to us. Caitlin squeezed her lower lip because she knew the reason, and Kailas tilted his head because he couldn't understand. And I brought a plate of chicken in front of Perez. After dividing it into pieces to make it easier to eat, I cooked one of them and put it in my mouth. Ah! Surprised, Perez screamed quietly. However, I looked at Perez straight ahead and chewed the food more tightly. Okay. Don't do that in the future. It's dangerous. Why? Maybe the food you eat is poisonous. The guy nodded. Only then did Kailas look upset about the reason for Perez's action. It wasn't because the new person was suspicious of himself. He just realized the reason why this little child had such fear. I said while putting the plate back in front of Perez. Don't worry about that in the future. Caitlin and Kailas are people you can trust. They're people from Lombardy that our grandfather sent to protect you. However, he still hesitated. I know the heart. When his mother fell ill and died, there was no one to help, and after that, even he was left alone, eating the poisonous food that the maid brought him once every few days. Now, if someone else comes up and says he will take good care of you in the future, you can't believe it, right? But don't refuse food. Do you believe me? I do. It was a quick answer that could not be compared to before. Then, why don't you give these two people a chance? Perez raised his red eyes and looked at Kailas and Caitlin. What are you seeing? After staring at the two for a long time, Perez raised the fork again. And carefully, he put the chicken I had cut into his mouth. Ah! From the back, I heard Kailas's relief. Is it delicious? Ah! My lips moved faster and faster. Then, after that, I put the warm bread before the meal, and then the jam-applied sandwich without hesitation. It was a messy dining etiquette for the prince to see, but no one pointed it out. For that, the appearance of Perez, who seemed to have eaten in a long time, was very desperate. I said, and pushing the sandwich in front of him. Don't mind what you want to eat in the future. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The guy's mindlessly taking food to his mouth stopped moving. Then, after a while, he nods his head once. The face of the guy who started eating silently again was a little brighter than before. I felt like he was enjoying the taste of the food. I too began to eat slowly next to Perez. When lunch was over, he ate over 3 servings by himself. Caitlin and Kailas smiled happily while looking at Perez's action of patting the stomach to see if it was hard. Soon after, the empty plate was removed, and a simple refreshment was prepared on the table. After a meal that has never been eaten before, Perez suddenly asks Caitlin for tea and a sumptuous dessert. Is the first prince living like this? Neither Caitlin nor Kailas, who was smiling, couldn't answer. Are you living in such a comfortable way for the first time? But Perez did not rush to answer the two. Without touching the teaware, I just kept looking at something reflected in the clear tea water. I couldn't find anything I could say this time either. After a while. By the time the tea water had cooled down, a voice was heard looking for me. Florentia. Grandpa. I got off the chair where I was sitting and ran to my grandfather. Said the grandfather who patted my head when I ran. Now let's go back home, Florentia. Your father must be worried a lot. If I'm father, I may not even go to work and may be waiting for me at home. The imperial palace was a very reluctant and tense place for my father, and since my grandfather and I go to such a place, he couldn't be comfortable. Then grandfather approached Perez. Sooner or later, teachers will come to teach you. Learn hard. Yeah. Academic and swordsmanship should not be neglected either. Yeah. The relationship between Grandpa and Perez is drier than I thought. 1 Perez didn't even see my grandfather's face properly, and he treated Perez with a different cold attitude than when he treated me. I helped by pulling my grandfather's hem. Grandpa. Perez is so smart. He read herbal books on his own and he was very good at swordsmanship. Is that so? Yes. So Perez will do well. The new teachers may be surprised because he good at studying and good at swordsmanship too. Not only did he use his head but he was different from Prince Astana, who had no spiritual talent for swordsmanship. Perez already has a different bud. He's the guy who showed such a tremendous appearance in his previous life, who was as big as a wild dog left alone in that forest in a separate palace. Now, how great would Perez be if the great teachers picked up by my grandfather to teach him? Just thinking about it made me all tremble. Moreover, I was very excited about the distorted faces of the Empress and Astana. Is that right, Perez? Ha! Perez replied, blinking her eyes slowly. I will do my best. The future of a genius who strives is inevitably bright. I approached Perez and greeted him, patting his head. I'll write you a letter. See you next time. It's time to say goodbye. He will be able to grow up safely, at least for the time being, until he goes to an academy where he will grow up and meet his people. Safe, in a much better environment than before. And if I exchange letters from time to time, at least Perez will not forget me. I reached out one hand to shake my hand. Goodbye, Perez. Eat well and grow up. Shit. Point 2. He pulled my hand out and hugged me tightly. Don't say goodbye. What? Goodbye, don't tell me that. 3. Oh, I see. Then. However, what should I say? I thought while pushing him a little. The man who hugged me as if he would never let go of me, I gently pushed him out of my hand. Right, that's what I should say. I said while looking at Perez with his gloomy eyes. See you again, Perez. His face bloomed in an instant. A dent on the cheek and a hidden dimple came out, and the tail of the mouth, which had always spoken gloomy words, rose slightly. 7. There was also something like joy in his red eyes that was empty of emotion, plus he replied with a face that looked like a small rosebud that had just emerged. Yes, see you again. On the way out of Poirak Palace I holding my grandfather's hand. And that night, after bathing in warm water with soft foam, I lie in my bed and put my head on a fluffy pillow. Looking back now, his smile has remained in my mind for quite some time, like a strong rose scent that I have never smelled before. Chapter 52. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Florentia, how are you? I think I'm used to the new palace now. Because in the east, the sun shines well. Perhaps that is why there are so many good herbs. Yesterday, while walking, I found a bunch of Bomnia flowers. One, I could recognize that it was a flower that bloomed a lot in the place where I lived before. Bomnia flower will bloom soon. It is a red flower with beautiful petals. If Bomnia flower blooms, can I send it to you? For the swordsmanship class starts tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. I had my first fruit sandwich yesterday. The white cream was sweet and delicious, but not as much as the candy you gave me. 3. Tomorrow, Kailas told the chef to make chocolate cookies. But it doesn't look as good as the one I had with you, so I'm not expecting much. If it's okay, send me a reply. If you don't like it, you don't have to. Really. 14. See you again. From Perez. P.S. I think you will also like the Bomnia flowers. 4 ***** to Perez. I am sorry for answering late. I've been a little busy these days. The horses my dad bought for my birthday have arrived, so I was busy taking care of them. They are very meek and pretty children. I named the mother Bailey and her baby Blanc. It's the first time I've ever heard of a flower called Bomnia flowers. I'll be looking forward to a flower gift. How are you? From Florentia. P.S. Why don't you stop eating grass now? 15 *****. Florentia. Finally, the Bomnia flowers bloomed. Autumn came slowly this year, and it seems to have bloomed late. I looked for a book, but the original Bomnia flowers are wildflowers that grow only in the southern part of the empire. Perhaps someone who misses his hometown secretly planted it in the imperial palace. I'll send the petals of Bomnia flowers to Caitlin. I'm not eating grass anymore. Something weird happened today. During the swordsmanship class, I came up with a thing called ore, but the floor is broken. Of course, I was so surprised, especially the swordsman's reaction was weird. After that, I made an aura several times and then went back. And in the evening, His Majesty the Emperor came to my palace. It was my first time seeing him in person, but we really don't resemble him at all. But His Majesty the Emperor laughed at my talent resembled him. How about Bailey and Blanc? Doesn't it bother you? I hope so. Because you shouldn't be overworked. See you again. From Perez. **** to Perez. Happy 13th birthday. 4 I wanted to give you a new sword as a birthday present. There was a limit for Caitlin to carry it out secretly, so it was impossible. So I'll send you some gold coins and a ruby brooch. This is. I picked it up while passing by. Anyway, happy birthday. From Florentia ***** Florentia I wore the ruby brooch you gave me last month to dinner. I couldn't eat properly because the Empress stared at me, but I felt good. 2 On your 10th birthday, I heard from Caitlin that the Vipash I presented to you had an accident with your beloved Bailey. On behalf of Vipash, I apologize. Maybe horse name, by any chance. By any chance, when we can meet again. 1 No other reason, because the last time I saw you were already 2 years and 6 months ago. 6 When I can see you again. From Perez. **** to Perez. If I see good ruby jewelry in the future, I will present it to you. The Empress is angry. I feel good. And don't worry about Bailey's. It's a happy thing for Bailey and Blanc to have a new family. Vipash is doing a great job of being a good father. And that's how time has already passed since we exchanged letters. Did you ask when I can meet you? We will meet soon. Maybe faster than you think. I will see you soon. From Florentia. ****, Tia, what are you doing? I heard a voice calling me when I just put the pen down and raised my head. I entered the study. A light brown haired woman, close to the wheat color, took off her coat and smiled at me. Oh, Laurel. Did you come early today? Laurel is a horse companion and a maid employed by my father when I was 10 years old. She kind and have a bright personality and turned 19 this year. Can you give me a room in the mansion? It's very troublesome to travel, Mississippi. No. If you don't go home, Mrs. Dillard is sad, right? She is the youngest daughter of the Dillard couple and a famous princess who is difficult to approach. I am worried because I'm the youngest. I have a lot of age difference from my 3 older brothers. My mother also told me to find a good groom now. I also want to have a relationship, but did you write a troubling letter because there was no man around? Laurel approached me and naturally asked, sitting next to me. I used that good stationery only once. At first, I used any paper. Over time Perez used good paper. The other person uses good paper, but I can't roughly write it down behind the exercise paper. I am inevitably writing a good letterhead. Come to think of it, it was already almost 3 years ago Perez moved to Poirac Palace. In the meantime, I am now 10 years old, and Perez is 13 after his birthday a while ago. 2 I've never seen his face in person again, but every time Caitlin came to the mansion, he occasionally asked hello in a letter. Who is the recipient? I can't tell you yet. You know. It is not yet to be known that I am the person who is sending and receiving letters with Perez. Lombardy and Anginas. It is not the time to intervene in the power battle between the first and second princes. When I put my folded letterhead in an envelope and handed it to Laurel, she used wax and sealed it. Will you tell me later? Yes, later. Laurel was a little disappointed, but soon forgot about the letter and watered the flower pot with a joyful face. How do you say the name of this flower, Mississippi? Bomnia flowers. That's right, Bomnia flowers. It's a pretty flower. It's a pity that I can only see it for a few days in autumn. That's why it's become prettier. Laurel stopped watering and said. Sometimes Miss speaks prematurely for your true age. I am a little smart, that's why. Oh, yes. If I think of your cousins, no one is smarter than you. That's a natural word. Laurel, with her two sleeves rolled up, opened both windows for ventilation. If it were the famous daughter of the Dillard family, I wouldn't have to work separately. Looking at her volunteer work for my maid, it seems that Laurel is not usually a unique personality. Because you're so smart, you know, Claravan's brother also decided to become your exclusive teacher. Not long after becoming my person, Claravan announced that he would resign from his successor education job and become my exclusive teacher. Thanks to that, the family was in a riot. How exciting is it when I remember that time? When I think of Cyril's face, who said she couldn't believe it, I still laugh after several years. Tuck. Tuck, the library door opened with a polite knock. It was Claravan. Brother. Laurel, who was clearing the curtains, ran toward Claravan. Hello, Dillard young lady. However, Claravan took half a step back and treated Laurel like dealing with a stranger. Sigh. When will you treat me as your sister? No one is here anyway. Laurel scowled and sad. Laurel, who heard about Claravan's existence from his father when she reached adulthood, was happy to see Claravan. I don't use the last name, Dillard. But why did you call me, brother? If your real brother hear it, he will be very disappointed. Brother, use the formal call, Orabioni, you are too much, really. Laurel shook his shoulders grimly and went outside. When Claravan comes and the class begins, Laurel can't enter my library. Claravan's eyes captured the back of Laurel disappearing out of the door for quite a long time. Looking at that, it doesn't seem like Laurel is completely stranger to Claravan. However, I didn't talk about it because I could understand a little bit of the heart that was born and raised as an illegitimate child. Soon Claravan sat down and the report continued. The performance of children's clothing, which started as Miss said, was great. The reaction was fast like when we first launched men's clothing. Here. Claravan gave me a well-organized report. Indeed, it was worth noting that Claravan Pellet was a genius. That when he first started the ready-to-wear business, he made a few mistakes. But he never made the same mistake over and over again. And now, almost 3 years later, the Gallahan clothing stores were spreading throughout the empire. The nobles in the neighborhood, who learned of the ready-made clothes system that successfully settled in Lombardy, struggled with each other and asked for a branch of clothing stores in their estates. Of course, there was a reason behind, that my father was the son of Lulac Lombardy and that a portion of the profits generated from the clothing store was paid to the lord in a tax form. As a result, none of the commoners who wore good quality clothes at low prices don't know the name of Gallahan. It has also been said that the health of the commoners, who now wear clean and seasonal clothes, has improved very much. In short, my father has become very, very rich in almost 3 years. 3 And because of the children's clothing line launched just a while ago, he is going to become even more wealthy. Plus, after receiving all the reports of the clothing store, I said to Claravan, who stood up and packed his luggage. Claravan, get ready to write your resignation soon. Underscore. Glossary 1. Bomnia cock. Originally I want to use spring flower literal meaning, but as the story goes it makes Bomnia is the flower name, so I decide not to translate this name. Chapter 53. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yes. The Claravan's handsome face became pale. The tall body staggered once, then leaned back against the back of the sofa and asked me with a look as if the world was over. Did I make mistake? Obviously, you misunderstood my words. He would even cry soon. I heard that Claravan's nickname is Cold Handsome. Where on earth is that face? Pretending not to know, I said a little bit late to make fun of Claravan. What extent do you expect, Claravan? No, Claravan rubbed his messy face. Ednell.co. If this continues he will cry. I said with a playful laugh. Not the clothing store. Are you ready to resign from my grandfather? Oh, then. Joy passes on Claravan's face, who understands what I mean. 7 I smiled and answered. My 11th birthday is coming. I have to get ready. The day I am free is not long. Of course, there is one hurdle to overcome before that. A flower of laughter bloomed on Claravan's face looking at me. And this? Could you pass it on to Caitlin? Probably now, she will be in my grandfather's office. I just handed out a letter envelope sealed by Laurel to Claravan. Claravan nodded, looks like he knows who this was written for. Poirac Palace's training ground. Perez, standing with his sword in a well-organized posture. Spacious Space closed his eyes and felt the wind. Although his black hair and collar were fluttering in the wind, the tall, slender boy remained unshakable. He just stands quietly with a beautiful face like a masterpiece. 2 The teaching method of the swordsmanship teacher attached by the Lombardy lord was slightly different from the other knights. In addition, it does not apply the law to make loud noises and does not teach students carelessly. Rather, Perez spent much of his class meditating like this. A little while ago, I was tried to reconsider places his teacher with the teacher in my mind. Perez was a hard but working guy that wasn't innately talented. Sometimes the swordsmanship class is forced to stop. But today it was a little different. Perez's swordsmanship teacher, Juves, looked strangely at the disciple who could not concentrate on the class. From a teaching standpoint, a student who absorbs everything at such a fast pace sometimes gets distracted like this. It was because he saw Perez every day like that. In the end, Juves said with a small sigh. Enough for today, Your Majesty. For someone who can't concentrate on the movement of the wind. Perez stubbornly closed his eyes and shook his head. I'll do more. It has been almost 3 years since he has regained his rightful position as a prince. Now it's okay to live a little more comfortably. The appearance of the second prince, who is still enthusiastic about swordsmanship and study, to the extent that obsessive-compulsiveness is suspected, made the observer a little worried. Juves wanted it to be good. In the meantime, Perez hadn't taken a single day off the swordsmanship class, so Juves thought he should make the second prince take a rest. You keep losing your concentration and composure, but only imitating is useless. I'm going to lower the sword. In the end, Perez slowly opened his eyes. Through the dark hair blowing in the wind, eyes brighter than ruby appeared. Perez, who is 13 years old, now is a boy, standing there, with a very beautiful appearance. 1 Sometimes it was too much and the reality was degraded. But Juves, who had been through Perez very closely, knew that this beautiful boy was actually a man who lacked so much. There was almost no joy or sorrow that any person would have. Even if there was, it was faint. When Perez expressed his emotional expression, it was only when he occasionally eats round candy or when he looks at the blooming Bomnia flowers. 1 Even when deliberately pushing strength training to its limits, Perez was silent. Regarding that, he even heard that even in academic class his attitude was the same. Despite the incredible speed of growth, Juves are worried about where the second prince's blindness is coming from. So today, Juves took the initiative to ask about what was bothering Perez. Is there someone you are waiting for? Juves asked while remembered Perez's gaze toward the entrance of the palace. Yeah. Replied Perez, in a small flinch. Who are you waiting for? Waiting for Caitlin to return home. Why? I can't tell you. Perez, who had always been telling the truth, refused to answer in the first place. As if hiding the most precious secret in the world, his young lips were stubbornly closed. Juves even felt a sense of betrayal. Please tell me. No, Your Majesty. I said no. Perez was even vigilant now. Are you refuse to answer your teacher, so I will punish you. Do 1,000 cuts up and down. Yeah. Now Juves has lost his words. Rather than telling the reason for waiting for Caitlin, Perez going to do 1,000 cuts. Juves shook his head. Soon, at the training hall, there was nothing but the sound of Perez's harsh breath. Huong, Huong. Around 500 times like that. Juve said at Perez, who had become sweaty. I don't know for what reason, but I'm very worried about Your Majesty. Huong, Huong. Just as understanding and inclusion in other people are important, it is also important to have a generous attitude toward oneself. Huong, Huong. Your Majesty, whom I have watched, lacks those points. It doesn't have to be perfect in every way. People don't know. It was weird. He couldn't hear the sound of the sword breaking the wind anymore. Juve's eyes turned puzzled and saw Perez already running at full speed from their point 2 with a sword in one hand and a scabbard in the other. It was the profile of someone running towards something like a crazy man. Well, Your Majesty. It was the first time. How Perez lost his composure like that. Point 2 No, the bright eyes that reminded me of the red ruby a little while ago showed even something like madness at first glance. Point 2 And on the side where Perez was running, there was a wagon that had just entered Poirac Palace. Juves felt unreasonable and just stood there watching him. Perez, who ran to the entrance and stood in front of the carriage, could not remain still even in the short moment when the footrest was placed and the carriage door opened. He quickly put his sword in the scabbard and rubbed his hands covered with dirt and sweat on his stretched pants. Point 1 Finally, the carriage door opened, and Caitlin, the maid of the Poirac Palace, stepped on the ground lightly. And when she found Perez standing right in front of her, she laughed while spreading, and took something out of her handbag and handed it over. Letter. It was definitely a small pink envelope. And a smile, though lightly, spreads on the face of Perez who received it. Red lips draw a nice line, and sharp eyes are curved. It was a clear smile. Ha! Juves laughed unwittingly at Perez's smile for the first time. Who in the world wouldn't saw a pure boy who didn't know what to do with that joy? Perez was standing still for a while. Then he grabbed the letter and ran into the palace. With the sword always thrown away from the body. Juves, seeing the sword lying on the floor, muttered bleakly. Well, if it's fortunate, that's fortunate. Asterisk asterisk asterisk, miss, can't I sleep here today? No. Why? There are so many rooms left. Why do you leave a good house and sleep in someone else's house? Go back quickly to, hey, young miss, you're too much. Laurel lowered her shoulders and pouting her lips, but it doesn't work for me. When I remember the last time I let her stay without thinking, and finally, I had to listen to Laurel's chat until I fell asleep. I trembled without even knowing. Haying. Then I'll come early tomorrow. Laurel, who said so, nodded to me and went outside. I'm on a holiday tomorrow. Do you know? But once I tell you, you might actually be sleeping here. I lay down on the sofa in the living room alone to enjoy the tranquility that finally came. The day was very easy thanks to Laurel's help, but sometimes I need time to be alone. I relaxedly closed my eyes. However, the stillness did not last long. Bang! The door opened with a loud sound. Laurel, what else did you leave, Dad? It was my father who was holding the door handle and breathing. I was amazed and sat up, plus, Tia. My father staggers when he calls my name. Then he stopped in front of the sofa where I was sitting and fell to his knees. My father's face, whose eye level was similar to mine, was crying. Ah, Dad. My father, who had been happily a few times, said the next word. Your dad getting a medal. Chapter 54. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Wow, the founding medal. Yups. The Imperial Palace sent someone to the clothing store. Each year, on the day of its founding, the Emperor confers a medal. It's up to the Emperor to who the medal will be given. Some of the successive emperors gave medals to their son, the prince. The contents of the medal were also varied. In some cases, given to the people, and in some cases, one of the royal relatives was greatly awarded. I made ready to wear clothes to help improve the health of the imperial people. He still couldn't believe it, he muttered and pinching my cheek. Dad is the best. I kissed my dad's cheek and made him happier. In fact, I already knew. The fact that the recipient of this year's founding medal is my father. It was because Emperor Jovans had already conveyed his intentions to my grandfather 3 months ago, and Claravan had told me that. I didn't write to Perez that I'll see him sooner or later. Moreover, this year's banquet was expected to be even more special. Claravan brought news that the extended family, who presided over each area, had arrived in the capital to attend the banquet. South Suso, East Lumen, West Huxley, and North Ivan. Of all the imperial banquets that have been held in the past few decades, was there any banquet as magnificent as this time and was attended by many valued guests? Because they told me to attend the banquet in 3 days. What should I prepare? My father is still muttering and choosing my clothes. First point 1. It's not me, but my father who wins the award. I'm going to wear the clothes at the Gallahan clothing store. My father was surprised at what I cried out, and his eyes widened. But, Tia. The clothes in the clothing store. My father was silent for a while. It's a little bit to wear to the Imperial Palace banquet. How about wearing the clothes that Aunt Shawnanette gave us as a gift this time? It seemed that he was worried that I would be teased after going to the Imperial Palace in ready to wear clothes. In a way, it was a natural concern. Ready-made clothes were common people's clothes. I could tell from seeing my father receive a medal for making ready-made clothes for them, who were always naked and cold. But he couldn't resist my stubbornness. I'm going to wear the clothes that my dad made. Tia. My father hugged me tightly. It seemed that he was moved by my extreme innocence. Thank you, Tia. My father patted my back at the end of his crying voice. Whose daughter will be so pretty? I also hugged my father tightly. I feel good, so I laugh. The Imperial Palace Banquet. It's a great opportunity to promote children's clothing. Point 3 ****, Your Majesty is waiting. The Emperor's chief butler said quietly to Perez when he approached. It's an early time when the sun has barely reached. Jovans called Perez about once a month to eat breakfast with him. Others looked at it and seemed to say, Your Majesty cares very much for the second prince, but well. Perez thought this was rather close to surveillance. He checked to see if the second prince who was reluctant to gather was sternly minded. Upon entering, the emperor was already eating. Without common greeting, Jovans didn't stop eating, confirming that Perez had come with a side glance. Perez, too, took a seat and sat down one place away. Before long, the food was prepared with the same excellent food that the emperor eats. Looking back at it, Perez recalled the day he first entered the Poirac Palace. When he was getting used to moldy food, that the day he first learned what a prince-like meal was. That day when the sun went down, the candles were lit, and the wall torch was lit all night, and he realized how warm the night was. On the day when anger was hotter than the burning fire. The only thing that made Perez laugh in the memory of that day was Florentia. I heard that the duration of your aura has increased noticeably. The emperor said to Perez, who was thinking about Florentia. Yes. Right. It was ridiculously short to answer to the emperor, but Jovans didn't mind. It was because his interest had focused on Perez's tremendous sword skills. When he first read the report brought by the swordsman teacher to the chief of staff, Jovans doubted his eyes. At the age of 13, Perez already capable of maintaining aura for an hour. Until recently, there had not been such an achievement in the history of the empire. At the age of 13, it was the age where talent is assessed by following physical and basic training. A similar example was Astana, the first prince. Astana, who has been holding swords from a much younger age than Perez, recently finished basic training at the age of 15 and had just started a theory class for aura. Very fast progress. Looking at Astana, the nobles of the empire were saying, the future of the imperial family is bright. Until now, Perez's achievements were known only as Jovans and his swordsmanship teacher. No, the swordsmanship teacher from the beginning was recommended by Lombardy, so Lulac also receiving the reports. But except for them, Perez was still a forgotten prince. It was completely different from Astana, which was receiving the attention of the nobles every step of the way. Only they knew the existence of Perez. Perez put down the spoon at Jovans's call. Attend this imperial banquet. Perez's red eyes looked at the emperor with doubts. Jovans looked at those eyes and wondered if Perez's mother, whose face no longer remembered, had those red eyes. Point 4, that I don't think it's a good idea. What came out after a moment of silence was rejection. Jovans was confused, he not even thinking that Perez would reject the emperor ordered. Perez had lived in a hidden place so far, Jovans thought he would be happy to finally jump on the chance to come out to the sun. Although there usually isn't much expression on Perez's face. There was a sign of annoyance now. You are someone who can be recognized as the second prince. Jovan said as the last warning. Do I need approval? What? Even when Jovans asked again, Perez stubbornly shut his mouth without explaining any further. The emperor looked at it and muttered to himself. You boy, you resemble me. In a moment, Perez's eyes were overwhelmed by unpleasant displeasure, but Jovans, who was absorbed in his own thoughts, continued to talk without seeing it. Yeah. You are my blood without the recognition of the nobles. You are the second prince of the Lambru Empire. The recognition Perez spoke of was not just the recognition of the nobles, as Jovans understood it. It meant that no need emperor's recognition too. In fact, it's been less than 3 years since the emperor began to care if Perez was alive or dead. Before that, Perez was thrown to the empress, hoping to die. Maybe the emperor wished that his overnight mistakes would disappear like that. However, Jovan seems to have taken it in a very different way. That's. Perez tried to correct the misunderstanding but was interrupted by the emperor's words. But the nobles need to know that Astana is not the only prince who is recognized by the emperor. Astana. Perez's eyes changed at the name of the first prince. Jovans, who noticed it, laughed wildly. Yes. You seem to agree with that. In fact, it's better to stay hidden for a few more years if it's entirely in Perez's interests. Astana's maternal mother, Angina's enormous power, Perez couldn't allow it. Although Perez had Lulac Lombardy as his guardian, it was only the deal between the emperor and Lulac. So, it's good to keep quiet as is and develop more strength on your own. But that's only the way for Perez. That wasn't the way for Jovans. Imperial banquet has a special meaning in many ways since ancient times. Not long ago, Angines offered 10 gold bars. It was an action taken by Angines to check Perez's existence and make him visible to Jovans. Angines would have to pay attention if Perez was at Imperial banquet this time. More than just 10 gold bars. It's even more special this year. Gallihan Lombardy is going to be admitted to receive the medal, so the nobles who attend the banquet will be the same as usual. I will attend, 13 Perez said at that moment. Until a while ago, it was a bright face, but now it shines from the eyes. You seem to be greedy. Jovans nodded and wiped his mouth with a napkin. It was because he didn't even think that Perez would change his attitude like a thunderbolt just by hearing the name, Gallahan Lombardy. Asterisk 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 the day of the Imperial founding banquet. I got ready with Lurel's help. Yes, this is it. I laughed with satisfaction when I moved my body in front of the mirror. Wow, Miss is so cute. Right. Usually, kids my age hate when adults say, cute. But no matter what they think, if I look cute to an adult, it doesn't matter. It's adults who buy children's clothes. To promote the children's clothing launch this time, the dress I chose was a gentle brown dress. It's a style that adults love to wear to their children, which makes my green eyes stand out and look neat. But that wasn't all. An off-white silk blouse was worn inside the monochromatic dress, and green silk embroidered with colorful flowers in gold was stitched along the hem of the brown dress. A fine emerald was attached to the brown fabric, which could seem flat. A rosario made of silver, whose thicker than the finger joints, was used to tie the waist once to make the dress more voluminous. In addition, the sleeves are decorated with round white lace, which makes it a gorgeous and beautiful dress that cannot be thought of as a ready-made dress. Although the beginning was similar to others, it was the charm of ready-to-wear that could change into a unique look by showing the desired accessories and each fashion sense. Of course, the point here is that everyone knows what a monotonous ready-made suit looks like. People need to know the prototype so that people can know how expensive jewelry I used and how I changed it to a pretty design with an aesthetic sense. It was a good material to stimulate the competitive spirit of the nobles who like to show off anything, have a lot of money, time, and a little work to do. Chapter 55. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Perfect. I put a hairpin made of very bright red ruby on the half-hair bundle that Lurel carefully braided, so my appearance in the mirror was cute even to me. It was a perfect banquet dress, with Lombardy's wealth combined with my father's ready-to-wear clothing at Gallahan clothing store. How about, Laurel? Does it look expensive? Miss, do you know how much this emerald on this one is? Maybe no one at today's banquet is dressed as good as Mississippi. That's it. To change the perception that ready-to-wear is cheap, it was deliberately decorated more colorfully. Ah, I can dye now too. Lurel touched my elaborate hair more carefully and said excitedly. I saw my young lady grow up like this and go to a banquet. Someone will think you raised me. But I also laughed when I knew Lurel's heart caring for me. You are so pretty today. Is there going to be an uproar at the banquet too? It's not that much. Don't overdo it. No. You don't know how pretty you are. That's cuter, but... Laurel looked at me as if she wanted to bite me while saying, oh, point one, in addition, today is the day when you first appear outside, isn't it? Is it? Then it turned out that Lurel was right. Unlike my cousins, who regularly attend banquets here and there even before making their official social debut, I have never attended such an event. My father wasn't really interested in that, and he's been so busy lately that I barely see his face. Although Jeanette suggested that we go together, there were many times that he refused. Miss Lorraine has made her social debut a while ago. Lombardy's lady has a good look. But it's not really because I have you, Mississippi. After all, our Miss is much prettier and cuter than Miss Lorraine. Laurel sighed deeply, saying, it's so regrettable that I can't see it in person. Afterwards, we'll have to go to the banquet all together, well. At the words I threw, a white smile blossoms on Lurel's face. That's right. It will. Finally, after looking in the mirror and checking again, I left the room. In the parlor, my father and grandfather were waiting for me while drinking tea. Miss is ready to go. The two of them looked up at Lurel's voice. And... wow. My father looked at me and closed his mouth. Grandfather sitting next to him frowned. Point one, it wasn't surprising that his wrinkles were deep in the eyebrows. What? Laurel said I was pretty. I felt anxious. Dad. Grandfather. The two began to move. Tia, my father ran and hugged me. It was a mysterious face that seemed to cry and laugh at any moment. My daughter is so pretty. It wasn't my mistake. My father's voice was definitely crying. I lifted myself and looked at my father's face. My father's eyes were clearly looking at me. I could feel it from the gaze that hovered around the outline of my face and from the gaze that looked deeply into my eyes. Now my father is seeing my mother in my face. It's not in my memory, but for my father, it's a face that's as clear as yesterday's memory. If you are still like this, it will be worth seeing later when your child debuts in the social circle. My grandfather approached with his back and said jokingly when he saw my father. So, social debut. Suck. My father, who was barely calming down, got up, turned his back, and finally grabbed the eyebrows. Florentia. Grandfather came to my father's place. And he still spoke with a wrinkled eyebrow. If you go to a banquet today, you'll be next to this grandfather or Gallahan too. Yes, Grandpa. If weird guys come and talk to you, just ignore it. 3. Yes, Grandfather. Yes. It's a little weird to answer with a habit of nodding my head. But if you're bothered, kick it with your feet. Leave the cleaning up to this grandfather. 12. And there is a small murmur. Hey, Tia so cute. Tia looks so cute. Asterisk 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 at the same time, Poirac Palace. Caitlin and Kailas, who accompanied Perez, exchanged eyes silently. This is when everyone is sleepy after lunch. As always, Perez holding a book open, but the atmosphere was different. Kailas looked at Perez, who had been nervous since morning, with anxious eyes. If you ask, Perez with that expressionless face is nervous about waiting for something. Kailas grabbed the bookshelf, which had already been motionless for an hour. Caitlin also looked at him and said, quietly approaching. Dear Prince, if you feel uncomfortable like that, why not go out for a while and come for a walk? There is still a long time until sunset when the banquet begins. Kailas also helped. Or maybe I'll order your favorite chocolate cookie. Eventually, the book Perez was held closed with a dull sound. It's tense. Yes. Woo. Perez sighed as he touched the corner of the book, Brown Swordsmanship. Point 1, It normal to be nervous. It's your first time officially attending the banquet, one Kailas comforted Perez. He was 13 years old and had little agitation, but today was a day that anyone could be nervous about. Point 1, In fact, it's called National Founding Banquet, but there's nothing special about it. You just have to come with your majesty and show your face and return. I and Kailas will be right by your majesty's side. How burdensome will it be? Previously his existence had been forgotten, and now for the first time, he had to stand in front of the people as the second prince of the Lambrou kingdom. It was a burden for the young prince to endure it alone. Perez, who was looking at the sad faces of those two people, said. I'm not worried about the banquet. 1. Well, then. Are you worried about Her Majesty the Empress? Kailas asked carefully. It was the only thing he could think of. Was there anything else that could make the second prince nervous besides the Empress? Point 1 Now he knew too. Why did young Perez remain alone in the separate palace, and how it was when they first met? Fortunately, after moving to Poirac Palace, Perez never met the Empress. The Empress still treated Perez as an absent person and excluded Perez from all imperial ceremonies. What was different from the past was that Perez was living in Poirac Palace instead of a separate palace and that he was properly educated and cared for as a prince instead of a neglected person. So, for Perez, the only schedule as an imperial family was to eat with the emperor once a month. Her Majesty the Empress may not know that the prince is attending the banquet. But even so, she is not a reckless person in front of everyone's eyes. Not that either. Perez shook his head. Said Caitlin, who was worried. The prince, then please tell us what is uncomfortable and we will. Tia, too, yeah. Tia is coming to the banquet. Perez, who threw the word, opened the book again and lowered her head. His ears were red, which could be seen between her fine black hair. So. Kailas couldn't believe his ear and asked. It's not because of the banquet who attended hundreds of nobles and not because of seeing the Empress again. Are you saying you're nervous about meeting Lady Florentia? One Perez's head nodded once. And he said in a small voice. It's been a while since I've seen her. Perez, who answered so, hiding behind the book again. 14 The book was still there until it was time to leave for the banquet hall. ******* We arrived at the Imperial Palace on our grandfather's special Lombardy carriage. Emperor Jovans will show the luxury of the imperial family this time, and the scale of the national founding banquet was different. Unlike previous years when the Emperor's Palace and the Empress's Palace were used, this year a whole large separate palace was decorated for a banquet. The bright lights of the banquet hall were visible from afar. It was spectacular to see the carriage of nobles present on the road from the main gate of the Imperial Palace to the banquet hall. However, the carriage with the emblem of Lombardy ignored all the long lines and stopped in front of the banquet hall as quickly as it was running on the highway. While the coachman was preparing the carriage's footrests, I looked out the window and realized one thing. I'm sure Lombardy is amazing. If they were invited to the imperial banquet, they would be noble families with their own power. And how much was everyone ready to come to the imperial palace? However, their carriage was shabby compared to the Lombardy carriages. Not just the size, it doesn't even look very sturdy. Just before the carriage door opened, my grandfather turned to me and said. Remember what your grandfather said. Just kick it with your feet. 5, yes, Tia. And call Dad too. Now my father has even joined grandfather. Fortunately, our conversation ended when the coachman opened the door. First, my grandfather got off, followed by my father. And I got off with my father's escort in the last. When I stepped on the ground, I heard a melodious melody of music flowing from inside the banquet hall with the cool night air. In fact, it is my first time in my whole life that I have attended this grand banquet. It was true that I was a little nervous. I walked with my father's hand on one hand and my grandfather's hand on the other. That was it. It wasn't because someone announced our arrival with a loud voice, it was just us a few steps away. But every time we took a step, a change occurred. One person, two at a time. They looked at us as if there were rumors about us. And by the time we arrived at the door of the banquet hall, everyone's eyes were focused on us. Chapter 56 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The situation became even more interesting when I entered the banquet hall with people's eyes following us. The people who filled the great hall walked away like a split sea and looked at the three of us with puzzled faces. This is the Lombardy family. The inside of the banquet hall was quiet enough to hear someone mutter clearly in my ears. But it was weird. Even though so many people were watching us, no one really came. Everyone was a few steps away and chatted among themselves. Grandfather even looked around the center with a relaxed expression as if this situation was familiar. And all those who have eye contact with my grandfather either avoid their eyes or bow their heads. Like the reaction when they met a beast. Meanwhile, the female nobles couldn't take their eyes off my father. 4 I looked up at my father holding my right hand. Taller than other men, a thin body, white skin, and fine brown hair that reached down to the shoulders are tied together in one form. 7 In particular, his gentle green eyes with long eyelashes sparkled in the banquet lights. In a word, it would be a handsome man with a warm atmosphere. My father looked at me like he felt my gaze looking at him. And he showed a comfortable smile. Perhaps it seemed to mean that I didn't have to be nervous. However, his smile that was meant to relieve my nervous affected the woman who was looking at my father, not at me. Here and there, I saw the girls with shaky legs staggered by my father's smiling face. 19 And surprisingly, there was me that caught as much attention as my father and grandfather did. Is that kid, the daughter of Galahad Lombardy? Oh, so cute. After all, she is a Lombardy's children. She looks like her father. Fortunately, the first impression is good. But immediately, other words were heard. She is the only daughter, right? So she is the only heir right now too. That's what will comes to mind when my father becomes a tremendous asset in the ready-to-wear business. And when I passed a group of old women, I heard these words too. Galahan's daughter is so smart that she received privileges from the Lord itself. Are there any successors from Lombardy whom he accompanied to the banquet? She must have been around 10 years now. She's just the same age as my grandson. And there were reactions I was waiting for. Whose work is that dress? It's a design I've never seen before. I'll find out later. It's so cute. Look at the jewels that hang over there. My God, these days, all the money in the empire is Lombardy and Galahan clothing stores. However, sometimes it is good to be the object of someone's jealousy and envy. This is the best feeling, it's thrilling. As we continued along the path that was divided like the Red Sea, a woman was standing at the end of the road. It was Empress Rubini, wearing a blue dress with gorgeous blonde hair. It seemed like she enjoyed being the center of social attention. She arrived separately from the emperor and had already enjoyed the banquet. The closer we approached the empress, the heavier the surrounding air felt. No one doesn't know that the relationship between Lombardy and Angines is not very good. After my grandfather publicly became Perez guardian, for a while, the empress was so upset about it. At a banquet where people gathered like this, what would happen if the empress from Angines and the House of Lombardy meet, and everyone is swallowing their saliva? But then, something happened that surprised everyone. The main character of today's banquet has come. It was because the empress came to us first with a beautiful and harmless smile. Those who were expecting even a sharp cold war between the two families became awkward. However, my grandfather greeted the empress with a friendly smile, as if he had expected that Rubini would come out like that. Thank you for preparing such a beautiful and magnificent banquet, Empress. The Lord Galahan of Lombardy has received His Majesty's medal, and I have to do this. Isn't it? With just a glance, it seemed like a neighbor who gets along well. Long time no see, Her Majesty the Empress. My father said hello first. The last time my father faced the Empress, the situation wasn't very good. The Empress used knights to break the oath to check our carriage, and my father even formally protested the Empress's actions to the Emperor. However, I couldn't feel that feeling at all in the appearance of the Empress, who smiled gently and was greeted by my father. Then the Empress looked at me standing my father and greeted me. You've grown a lot while I haven't seen you, Florentia. In a few more years, the social world will be thrilled by the beautiful Lombardy lady. Rubini, who said so, asked her grandfather. The children of Lombardy have decided to marry quickly since ancient times, right? What about Florentia? For a moment, I saw the laughing grandfather's eyes turn cold. The Empress's remarks were just political remarks using the crowd around him. It was meant to make the Empress appear interested in me as Astana's partner. Point 2. That's an old story too. My granddaughters don't have to. This time, the face of the Empress was hardened. Since I heard the word, I don't need your son, in front of me, it's okay. Point 4. It seemed like a giggling and laughter would burst out, but the conversation with an invisible blade ended there. It was because the Emperor arrived at the banquet hall. The music stopped and the people who danced and talked all bowed their heads in front of the Emperor. However, the interior of the hall, which seemed narrow, started to loosen up in an instant. Emperor Jovans was not alone. He was walking with a black-haired beautiful boy. He is tall, wears remarkably luxurious clothes, and the expressionless face that puts everyone down has a charm that makes viewers unable to take their eyes off of it. People could quickly infer the boy's identity. Isn't that kids? His Majesty the Second Prince. I was amazed by the people. In the meantime, everyone knew of the existence of the Second Prince, but no one had seen the Second Prince. It seemed that the Empress thoroughly excluded Perez from the imperial family, and the Emperor kept it that way. However, today the emperor made the second prince attend the founding banquet. He brought him himself. The impact was tremendous. Right now, the emperor officially introduced the existence of the second prince to the nobles of the empire, and he said to the empress not to rule out the second prince again. I turned my head and looked at the empress. Her face is distorted, compared to the face that hardened in the conversation with my grandfather a while ago. 2 It told me how shocked she was, with trembling eyelids and her white face. Annoying. A terrifying sound comes from the empress mutter. I quietly half-step walked away from the empress. Perez, who she tried to kill by putting him in a separate palace and feeding him with poison, is not enough to accept Poirak Palace in the east. Now whether she likes it or not, she can no longer ignore Perez as the empress of the empire. Besides, it would be even more upsetting that all of this was the emperor's will that she believed in. Emperor Yovans had many things he didn't like in many ways, but this time it was a nice shot. Sue. Emperor and Perez were walking to where the empress and we were standing. The figure of Perez, who was hidden by the large Yovans, is now starting to be seen. This guy was growing up a lot. He hasn't been able to take off his baby face yet, but the first thing I noticed that he was tall enough. The last time I saw him, he was so small and thin that he didn't look like his age. Kailas and Caitlin took good care of him and he grew up very healthy. However, the personality was the same with fewer emotions and sorrows than others, and none of the expressionless faces changed. I was looking at Perez with a proud heart like watching our nephew after a long time, and suddenly our eyes met. Between curiosity and amazement, the man who saw the nobles who were staring at him then looked at me too. And I could see his eyes curled as if trying to smile. No. Now it is not known that he is the person we know and are always in touch with. Of course, only my grandfather knew, because of the report from Caitlin, but I didn't even tell my dad because I didn't want to cause worries. I glared at Perez as hard as I could. Do not laugh. Don't even pretend to know. Fortunately, Perez seemed to have noticed right away. On the face where a small smile was about to bloom, oops. It soon passed and returned to the expressionless face. 2 Right. Well done. Still, he didn't look anywhere else. As I told him, he kept looking at me with a face that couldn't reveal his heart. It's been a while since we've met, so you'll want to say hello. However, it's not too late to say hello later. When the banquet is in full swing and there are no more eyes to see. It's been a long time for me to say hello. Gallahan. The emperor laughed openly and called my father's name. The difference is quite striking when my father and the emperor stand side by side, the emperor somewhere like bandits, and my father looks like a delicate art sculpture. 3 A hand like the lid of the pot struck my father's shoulder. It's very hard to see your face before giving the founding medal. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I felt it before, but the emperor is very friendly in a way. I wondered if it was a politician's habit to hide his heart and perform skillfully. I realized one thing when I watched the emperor joking around with my father and grandfather as if everyone was told to just listen to them. The conversation was going on with intentionally excluding the empress. Even his gaze was not placed on the empress. Just a moment ago, I could see the empress's face, who was tired of white, turned red with anger. The emperor was also a very foxy person. He has a face that seems distant from politics, and he balances Lombardy and Anginas in his two hands. Now the empress and Anginas were wary that the emperor would give our family more power, so she had to give more and try to meet the emperor's favor. I am admiring the world of adults like that, but one side of my cheek is sore. When I looked at the place where I could feel the gaze, it was Perez. He was looking at me without even blinking. 2 It was frustrating to pretend that we didn't know each other, and his white face reminded the past a little. I think it's adult Perez that she remember. I didn't hate Perez's appearance either. Still, since I was young, I was so happy that I was a little bit helpful to myself. It seems that exchanging letters works for me. It was a positive response when I think about the future. After a while, I'll go somewhere and eat half a chocolate cookie. It was when I turned my head back while thinking so. My eyes ran into someone who was watching us. Point 1 It was His Majesty the Emperor Jovans. Chapter 57 You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The eyes with a strange light were looking at me and Perez. Ugh, have I been caught? It was frustrating. No one should ever know that I and Perez know each other. I quickly avoided the Emperor's eyes. But I could feel it. BDNVL.M that tenacious gaze stays on me for a while longer. But when I looked back later, the Emperor was talking with my father and grandfather with the same face as before. Did I see wrong? There was a possibility that I was terrified by Jovans's gaze that he gave without thinking. Either way, I tried not to give my eyes to Perez again. Then, let's start with awarding and enjoy the banquet. Jovans said, taking care of the gathered nobles. My father, who was still holding my hand, said tenderly when he was standing near my grandfather. Dad, I'll go back for a while. Even though I was nervous enough to get my hands cold, I take care of myself first. The children over there were completely different from the Emperor, who did not care about making them his maids. I kissed my father on the cheek to cheer on him. With that alone, my father smiled broadly as he was empowered. Emperor Jovans stood on the podium in front of the crowd, and the Emperor's aides brought the medal. When I saw the back of my father walking to the center, everyone's eyes were on the podium. There was Perez, standing proudly as a member of the imperial family. Astana, who was now completely in puberty, was also next to the Empress, who was staring at Perez with a really stiff face. Even when she gets older, she still can't manage her facial expressions. Then suddenly, I looked at Perez. He was still looking at me. Whether it feels good or bad. Point 1 The expressionless face, whose inner heart is not well understood, suits the royal family 100 times better than Astana. I smiled at him and turned my face back to the podium. The appearance of the medal varies depending on the recipient, but my father's medal appeared as a large necklace made of gold. And another aide was standing behind it. Like a trophy, it was held in both hands. Galahad Lombardy, come here. At the Emperor's words, my father knelt in front of him. I, Jovans Cannabon Lambrou Dorelli, will present this founding medal to you. Unlike when he laughed a while ago, a low, loud voice spoke as if solemnly proclaimed. I deserve this medal because I have contributed to my willingness to care for the people of the Lambrou Empire in an ingenious attempt no one has ever thought of. A necklace with an imperial seal was hung around my father's neck. And your achievements are very good, so I give a special gift to Galahad Lombardy along with the medal. Special present. The official who was waiting for the second time came forward. And it was a scroll made of old leather that was handed down to the Emperor's hands. Jovans unfolded it, making it visible to all, and gave it to his father. From today, I declare that Galahad Lombardy is the owner of the Cheshire territory. Heodadiak, I wasn't the only one taking a quick breath. Everyone in the banquet hall was astonished. As you may have known in advance, except for my calm grandfather and the Emperor who smiles. Although the founding medal had a special meaning, the biggest gift awarded with the medal was a territory. It was a kind of territory that would be returned to the imperial family when the person who received the medal died. Point 1 What do you mean by territory? And that scroll made of leather is a territory document no matter how much you look at it. Moreover, the Cheshire territory is not land directly ruled by the imperial family. Since the Nocta River, the second largest river in the Lambrou Empire, has been developed nearby, it has a high grain production and a high population density. Mrs. Suso. Someone shouted in a small voice. Behind the Emperor's left side, the gray-haired elderly woman remained indifferent to the concentration of people. Beatrice Suso. My grandmother, Natalia Suso, is an elderly woman who serves as the head of the House of Suso, the wealthy man from South Alkesia. Originally, the Cheshire territory, the land of the Suso family, was handed down to his father. That meant the will of Beatrice Suso. Father looked at the territory document in his hands with a blank face and said, "Your Majesty, I will take good care of it." The medal ceremony was short, but the afterglow was big and long. "Come on, sit down and rest for a while," my father mumbled, grasping the territory document with both hands. "Ha! You are too soft, will you be able to play the role of a lord properly?" Emperor Jovans came back to chattering again and made fun of my father. "Yes, it good. He's just showing off the territory to other people." Now Jovans, who said he would enjoy the banquet, disappeared among the nobles, and I shook my father's side. "Dad! Tia!" My father looked at me and smiled weakly. What should I do with such a good thing? It was a face that had a feeling of burden and debt ahead rather than the joy of having territory. "How can you do that?" "It's thank you. You just have to say thank you and live well." "Aunt." It was Mrs. Beatrice Suso who approached. She is a person who becomes an aunt to my father. She was smiling kindly at my father to the point where I wondered if the rumor is true. Mrs. Suso was famous because of her unfortunate personal history. He had 2 children, but both died in an accident, and her husband also going first. The family members have been demanding that the family hand over their rights for years because they have no succession, but she ignores all of them and holds power firmly. But there's also something that's so famous, so it's her aesthetic and fashion sense. The influence of Beatrice Suso is so strong that the fashion trend of the empire begins in the south. Will all kinds of textile merchants be located in the Suso estate? Until the opening of the Gallahan clothing store, what people think of when they think of clothes was Suso, not Lombardy. I pretended to be as fine as possible, but I couldn't help being a little nervous. Sure enough, Mrs. Suso's gaze reached me. "Ah. This is my daughter, Florentia. She's a grandmother to you, Tia." "Hello, Mrs. Suso. I'm Florentia Lombardy." Mrs. Suso is proud of what she has achieved. So I thought it would be better to call an official title rather than a title between relatives. Fortunately, Mrs. Suso nodded with a slight smile, as if she liked it. And she went through the clothes I wore. Plain but sharp brown eyes glistened with red beauty. "Oh, you look great in your clothes." "Thank you for the compliment, Mrs. Suso. This is the clothes from the Gallahan clothing store. You say this is a ready-to-wear that I only hear in words." The old lady's eyes were round. It's a little too much to call ready-to-wear. She wants to wear the clothes I made to the banquet today, and my daughter dressed up with various decorations, so it's very different. My father quickly explained, shaking his hands. "This dress, this kid." Mrs. Suso stared at me. "Do you like it, ma'am?" I asked with impatience. "Okay. It's a very pretty dress." I was a little nervous, but it worked, too. In fact, the style of neatly inserting silk with colorful embroidery on the corner of the closet was popular in her previous life. But I wasn't sure if it would work now because it was 3 or 4 years from now. But now that she can't take her eyes off my dress, she seems to like it. Yes, if you use ready-to-wear in this way, you can get quite a variety of outfits. Mrs. Suso muttered, touching the fabric of the dress I was wearing without her knowing. Before I knew it, my existence was something like a mannequin dressed in clothes, but it didn't matter. That's why I'm wearing this, so thank you. The silk produced in Suso can be in good harmony with ready-to-wear. What do you think, Gallahan? Mrs. Suso asked my father. "Oh, that's..." My father was in the middle of choosing a word for a while. But another voice suddenly interrupted the conversation. "The jewels on those clothes belong to our estate, Mrs. Suso." It was Jerome Ivan, a Lord of Ivan whose long white beard was impressive. What happened to Lord Ivan to interrupt our conversation? Mrs. Suso from the south moved first, and it's no big deal that I came. It's different from running over the flat land and the labor crossing the mountain and the lake. A tense fight broke out between Mrs. Suso and Lord Ivan. Everyone was here. This time is just the eastern side. Except for Anginas in the west, all the rich people from other regions gathered in one place. My father was suffocated by the energy of the three people, and it seemed that he would be choked at any moment, and the nobles around him were walking around to hear the conversation coming and going. Lumen's family, who came last, straightforwardly asked my father. Yes, this time, the Gallahan clothing store is planning to create a branch that will extend from the center. In the meantime, clothing stores have spread around the Empire and Lombardy estates, the center of the empire, and the middle and great estates around them. And this time, he was searching for other provinces other than the center, and the rumors seemed to flow. For that matter, I'm not the person who's working on that. My father said, sweating. Ah. There you are. Claravan. Just in time, Claravan approached this side and greeted politely. His appearance of wearing an indigo silk tunic suited the gorgeous banquet. It's a Claravan pellet. My father introduced Claravan to the two lord. I am still inexperienced and only take care of external work, and this Claravan.nim is in charge of the actual work of the clothing store, so the question is here. In fact, to be exact, the people who are working on that were me and Claravan. Since people don't know my existence, Claravan's stock price is rising. Ho, I see. Hey, go over there and have a glass of wine with me. I have a very good rose wine that I brought directly from Lumen. Lord Ivan and Lord Lumen rushed to Claravan. The business meeting starts on the spot. More details about what's going on, Claravan will tell me later. As the lord of each region came forward, the middle-high-ranking owners who attended the banquet aimed at their father couldn't even give out their business cards. From a distance, they were only drinking alcohol with a dissatisfied face. However, Mrs. Suso was not attached to Claravan. Rather, she came close to my father and me and said, "Shall we have a conversation about the land of Cheshire, Gallahan?" It was the smile of the winner who had already scored a good number. Chapter 58. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Haha. Nothing has changed, Aunt. He laughed freely. Well, does an old man easily changed? Mrs. Suso also made a mischievous expression toward my father. Your brothers didn't attend. V's and Laurels did not attend today's banquet. Recently, I heard that the two are busy trying to start a new business together. No one knew what the business was yet. Shawnanette wanted to come to the banquet together, but the twins caught a fever at the same time, so they couldn't come. Instead, she sent me decorative buttons that would match my father's clothes today. They are busy people. My father replied as if it was okay, but Mrs. Suso squeezed her tongue. Since you were a child, your brother Laurels. That foolish guy was busy chasing after V's pants. Is that so? Okay. V's was so greedy, there was a time when he tried to put all of the cookies that you and Laurels shared in one bite, but I was dumbfounded. He was so greedy that he didn't know whether his stomach hurt or not. Oh, I laughed too loudly. HRMM. She coughed quickly and pretended not to be, but Mrs. Suso's eyes were sore. She is a woman who hates spoiled people and doesn't follow manners as much as her fiery personality. It seemed that sweat was flowing behind my back. I quickly said to my father. Is it okay if I visit the banquet hall, Dad? Yes. Yes. My Tia is bored. Don't go to the dark place, stay in this banquet hall. Yes, Dad. I walked to another place without forgetting to politely say goodbye to Mrs. Suso. First of all, it is a retreat in terms of operations. Asterisk. Isn't our Tia pretty, Aunt? When she looked at Gallahan, who was still smiling like a child, Beatrice Suso felt a bit of sadness. It was Natalia and Beatrice, who had a close relationship when they were young. Although the relationship was awkward between a sister.in law, the two were as close as their siblings. Back when Natalia was dead, she was about to give up the world. Her face became gloomy and lonely remembering her memories. From Galahan's smiling face, Natalia's kindness was alive like a lie. It was also true that Galahan, who inherited Natalia's docile and quiet personality, was often worried about whether he would be okay among his strong brothers. Not good to be proud of her too much. Is that so? But Tia is so lovely. Affection shines through Galahan's eyes when he looks at his daughter's round head. I'm not saying that my daughter, Tia, is a really smart kid. In fact, that dress that she wears today is also decorated by Tia herself. She wears jewelry as she wants and sticks different fabrics. Oh, really? Beatrice's wrinkled eyes recaptured Florentia's dress. In her eyes, it was very stylish, and it was a dress with an attractive eye-catching charm. She was about to ask the name of the person who designed the clothes. By the way, the child who is only 10 years old was the creator. Mrs. Suso, who was watching Florentia disappearing inside the balcony, said, deliberately, jokingly. It's fortunate that she has an aesthetic sense, and I don't think it's like her father. Sue, aunt. What about me? Instead of answering, Beatrice glanced at Galahan from top to bottom with dissatisfied eyes. Since you were born with such a handsome appearance, it doesn't mean you only use that amount, so I'll talk about it. Galahan, whose face was slightly reddened, turned the subject to Florentia again. Everyone says that when they see Tia, she looks like me. That kid. Mrs. Suso laughed. A soft person like you is fundamentally different from that child. But she's my daughter. If she doesn't resemble me then. Sean, was it? The name of the child's mother. Galahan shut his mouth tight. It's been a long time already, but it's still a taboo name. Okay. That child resembles her mother. Especially the snow in her eyes. Somewhere calm, clear, purposeful eyes. All aside, it wasn't the eyes that a 10-year-old could have. How could this gloomy Galahan raise such a child? Mrs. Suso was also curious. Cheshire territory is not a very large mass of land. There are large mountains and rivers nearby, and the land is fertile, so it will be enough for a single family to live. It was as if it could be a small country manor in Cheshire territory. However, it was a transportation hub between the center and the south of the continent before the Lambrou Empire, and it was a large grain area with a perfect flatland and a mild climate. It was like Suso had given Galahan a pretty big piece of flesh. Originally, the land was what Natalia wanted to take as a dowry to Lombardy. However, she decided against it because she did not want the Lombardy territory to expand again. Something like that, I never knew. Because your father is not someone who will speak off. Now that you own your land, you have the right to know. Galahan's shoulder flinched. I'm sure the eldest son, Vise, is going to be the next overlord. So, when the time comes, bring your daughter and come to Cheshire. The warm south will be better for the child to grow up. Thank you so much, aunt. Galahan bowed his head and said goodbye. Mrs. Suso's laughed voice stuck to his head. It's not free. Yes. If you're grateful, put out the branch of the Galahan clothing store. Galahan's eyes were awful. Suso, whose clothing and textiles are growing rapidly, will be more suitable than people who say hello. What do you think? Galahan couldn't answer easily, Just laughed hard. ***** pretending to be distant, I kept watching my father and Mrs. Suso. I don't know if I need to look from the curtains of the banquet hall or the transparent wine glass. This day's meeting was important. It was obvious that each region's officials gathered on the banquet of awarding my father's medal as an excuse to covet a branch of a Galahan clothing store. So, as a result of selecting the branch candidates by weighing things in advance, it's sad that the best candidate is only one. There were simply two reasons. One is because clothing and textiles have already been developed, so I thought it would be compatible with the ready-to-wear business, and the other was because the climate conditions in the south are mild. The climate in the center of the empire is mild and the temperature is mild throughout the year. Ready-to-wear clothes at the Gallahan clothing store were made according to it. The excessively hot west or, on the contrary, the cold north has its own clothing method, so to enter a clothing store, new clothes must be made. However, in the south or east, where the climate is similar, you can bring the clothes as they are and sell them. However, the eastern part has the disadvantage of being difficult because there are many mountains along the way. So, the only thing left was the south, which is also the center of the south. Besides, since they were a relative who cared for my father quite a bit, there was also a calculation that we could save a little of the tax we had to pay. Fortunately, from a distance, the atmosphere was still good. It was a moment when I was sweeping my heart while looking at my father's smiling face. A hand appeared on my arm and pulled me to the balcony. Ha! It was a touch that was not painful and had some consideration, but I was surprised. I was instantly standing on the dark balcony of the bright and colorful banquet hall. Hi! A voice, which had not yet come, was heard from behind my back. His hair is so dark that it can't be distinguished from the night sky, and his eyes shining dark red in the dark. Hi, Perez. When I called his name, he laughed at me. Seeing the slightly raised corners of his mouth and slightly curved eyes, Perez seemed to be smiling quite brightly. Tia. You were surprised me to pull so suddenly. Sorry. Perez's quick personality was the same as before and now. But he has changed a lot too. The small and skinny boy, which does not match his age, is gone, and now he was tall. Standing side by side with a teenage boy, my head seemed to touch his shoulders. It's been a while. How are you? He looked at me down and asked. But just in time, the moon came out of the clouds. The white skin of Perez shone finely in the moonlight falling from the sky. Wow, this child's skin is very good. It seemed to be seeing a sample of adolescents who eat well and live well in an environment with no blemishes and a smooth face. I'm proud. I laughed. As I said in the letter, I was fine. How are you? Imperial Palace life, isn't it hard? Are you worried? He said in a strangely happy tone. Of course. You are the future prince who made me settle in the Imperial Palace. Tia, as you said, I'm eating well and learning well. It's hard sometimes. Is it difficult? Is the swordsmanship teacher making it difficult? I've heard from Caitlin about Perez's swordsmanship teacher. I had a lot of worries because he was the type that made the training very strict, but I was more worried because Perez did that hard class without saying that it was difficult. Not like that. Just sometimes. Perez's eyes turn to me. And he stares at me silently. Sometimes. No. Did I do well? The guy who didn't answer my question asked me. Earlier. When entering with His Majesty the Emperor. I have endured a lot. Perez replied. It's nice to see you after a long time, but I must pretend to don't know you. You told me that other people shouldn't know what goes between us. So I endured it. No way, are you asking me to praise you now? So, am I good at doing it? You're asking for a compliment, that's right. It looks like everything is big now. Does he still believe in my trick? I swallowed a sigh and looked at Perez. Even under dim light lanterns and shining eyes only look at me. I really want to check his ass to see if there are any black fluffy tails. Come. I said, calling Perez. Ha. If he couldn't understand what I was saying, a big question mark appeared on his face. Come here. Only then, Perez, who understood what I was saying, said a little. Ah. His black shiny hair gradually came to me. In fact, it was a big deal when someone sees it. Perez, a royal family, bows his head to me. However, he didn't seem to have such reluctance. Well done. I patted Perez's head with strength. 6 Very well done, Perez. His eyes were loosened. Chapter 59 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The hair that touched my fingers felt very soft. Maybe Perez has nicer hair than me. 2 I thought hard. I was a little confused about what Perez was doing in front of me, then I made eye contact with Perez, who was silently lowering his head. And he grabbed my hand. It was a moment when I felt embarrassed by a hand that suddenly grabbed mine. Something touched my hand. What is this? A gift. It's a gift. When I opened my hand, I saw a round dot-shaped flower on my palm. It looks like a mixture of lilies and roses, and the color is reddish. But why the flowers is hard? Why? This. Is it ruby? Yes. Ruby was too precious to nod lightly. The weight and volume felt by the hand are also considerable. I walked to a brighter place and looked at the ruby in my hand. It's a little smaller than a ping-pong ball, and the ruby was carved into a flower shape. However, the shape of the petals was a little strange. Like it was made by someone who was sculpting for the first time, it was awkward at first and then quickly became more proficient. Did you sculpt this? As before, he just nodded his head stiffly. How? No, why? Why is the second prince, who is busy studying swordsmanship every day, sculpting ruby that has nothing to do? I want to give you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. What the hell did you use to sculpt the ruby? It's not as easy as carving wood with a knife. Perez replied to my question, saying that it wasn't a big deal. Because I was putting aura on a small knife. If it's like that then, definitely. Wait, you sculpted with aura? The guy nodded again. Come. Show me a little aura. Oh my gosh. I've never heard of a jewel cut and shaped with aura. The price of ruby itself is enormous, too, but it was carved with aura. Aura was very useful. It was as if the use of the aura he exuded was just to carve rubies. Certainly, his way of thinking had a very peculiar corner somewhere. I sighed and looked at the ruby in my hand. Thank you, I'll take it well. Someone might say it's a too burdensome gift and refuse it. Why is this? Later, when Perez becomes crown prince and becomes emperor, the value of this ruby will not be converted. A ruby hand carved by the emperor using aura when he was a child. Save it either. The fact is. Perez pulled something again, rummaged from his pocket. It was a string made of long gold. It was a necklace. When I looked closely, there was a small ring on the back of the ruby. How could the ring be in that jewelry? I didn't want to ask. This too? Yeah. Well, there's nothing that can't be done with aura. I secretly saw Perez put on the necklace. If that's okay, would you like to wear this necklace? He asked very carefully. You're saying this is mine? Of course. Isn't that obvious? He asked me, then what shall I do? I quickly stretched out my neck. The necklace was long, different from what an adult would use, and ruby flowers fluttered slightly. When it moved, several sections shone, reflecting light. Pretty. Rarely, Perez said first. Yeah. You are pretty. The parts that are engraved at the beginning make the flowers more colorful. Thanks. I said again. I liked ruby so much that I thought I could say it 10 times. I also. Perez said something I didn't know again. And there was no conversation between us for a while. That didn't mean it was awkward. I visited the lit garden and listened to music in the cool breeze. And, Perez. Why do you keep looking at me? Your gaze will be very piercing, hey. Hey. Instead of answering my question, Perez said something else. Is there no way to meet each other sometimes? What does that mean? It would be nice if we could talk like this sometimes. Expressing what you want directly like this is unexpected. I asked carefully, thinking about it. Aren't we going to exchange letters? There are many things that cannot be conveyed by letter. Perez's tone was cautious. He is afraid of someone reading the letter, so he's reluctant to write important stories. Do not worry about it. Caitlin was not the one who would open someone else's letter, and because she was commuting on the Lombardy carriage, there's no need to worry about someone taking her in the middle. Perez listened to my explanation for a while, then shrugged and replied after a while. That if you say so. It turns out that a long time has passed since we entered the balcony. Once you go out first. I said to Perez. Since this is your first time appearing at a banquet, many eyes on you. Okay. Somewhere the answer from the guy is not good. Anyway, Perez went first through the balcony veil. Left alone, I went back to the banquet hall after counting roughly to 100 while listening to music and people talking. Someone spoke to me as I wet my throat by taking the drink I had brought with me. There you are. Looking at her, she was a red-haired girl who looked the same age as Lorraine. Next to her looks like a younger sister who is the same age as me. Who is this, the face I've never seen before? When I turned around, wondering, the two grasped the skirt of the dress and politely say hello. Hello, young Mississippi Florentia Lombardy. I'm a Patricia from Gus family, and this is my sister. I am Haley Gus, young Mississippi. Despite their somewhat shy and quiet impression, the two of them looked like high-ranking noble daughters, seeing that the clothes and accessories they were wearing were gorgeous. They also greeted me by holding the skirt of the dress. This is our first time meeting. I am Florentia Lombardy. I just introduced myself in a normal way, but the two were frightened. You're being polite. Even if you don't have to, no, you shouldn't. Patricia's face quickly turned red, as if my guess of her shyness was correct. Please take it easy, Lombardy young Mississippi. Well. Depending on the prestige of the family, the ranks among young lady and young master are also established. In that sense, Lombardy was the top family in the pyramids of the nobles. When Lombardy's direct lineage was said with respectful words, Patricia didn't know what to do right now. But I replied with a slight smile. No. It's comfortable to say like this. Oh my goodness. If someone is higher than yours and treats you with kindness and common sense, people will be more moved and grateful. Patricia was impressed with me, not acting. The clothes that young miss wearing are so beautiful. Can you please tell me which dressmaker you went to? As if her younger sister, Haley, also had courage, she clenched her fists and asked. I'm sorry if you excuse me. There was a quick apology followed. If it's Gus, I know them. This is one of the hallmarks of the Lumen family from the East. Although the population is small, it is a family that makes quite a lot of money taking taxes using the river to transport goods along the Great River. I looked around pretending to be worried about telling her or not. After all, it wasn't just the two sisters who were waiting for my answer. Suddenly, young children of the same age and their mothers were gathering near me. Do other people want to know? I just asked openly. It's embarrassing that I listen to someone's conversation, but everyone feels embarrassed, so I came a little closer. If you want to know, I can tell you. People's faces were noticeably brighter at my words. In fact, in many social circles, the name of the designer or the dressing room they hired was a secret. It was to monopolize the design alone. This clothes. I talked after a moment of silence. It's clothes from a Gallahan clothing store. You mean ready-to-wear clothes? A noble lady asked me in surprise. Yes, that correct. Oh my God, how can ready-to-wear clothes be so beautiful? The wives are already upset. I watched their reaction and said, laughing at the right time. Thank you for the praise. Actually, this dress is ready. Wear, but I also decorated it myself. I'm glad to hear that it's pretty, so it seems that my eyes are praised. You said that young miss did it by yourself. The woman who covered her mouth with a fan spoke from behind and looked at my dress asking as if she couldn't believe it. I know who she is. Giulietta Abino, from a fallen family with only names left, became an opera star with her beautiful voice and appearance. While receiving indirect support from the Empress and making a name for herself in the social world, she was a woman who was despised by the noble ladies for coming from a very low-key family. Well, Giulietta's behavior, who is having a relationship with many aristocratic men using her pretty appearance, is also part of it. In the future, he will become the lover of Astana, the first prince, and will be abandoned by the Empress. Point 2, I got my dad's help, but I picked all the basic ready-to-wear dresses, laces, and the silk or jewelry I put on to decorate them. Young miss has a very good sense of aesthetics. Giulietta said, narrowing her eyes as if she couldn't believe me. Perhaps she thought I was lying because I didn't want to give the name of the person who designed the costume. Then, a noble lady who hated her sharply struck her back. What disrespectful attitude is that to Lombardy's young Miss Abino? Yes. There have been many rumors for a long time that the daughter of Gallihan Nim is brilliant. So, is it that Lombardy young miss is lying at the same time? Well, I'm not saying that. Just before Giulietta's pride fell. It was because he was the one directing Lombardy's direct line as a liar. I was saying that Lombardy young miss clothes were excellent. I'm sorry, young miss. It's okay. When I answered with a smile, Giulietta's complexion was even more relaxed. How can you be fine? Lombardy young miss is so generous. Even though the ladies still glanced at Giulietta, they praised me so that the mouth was dry. They would say that even the sound of my breathing was pretty. Point 1, I said a word wrong, and now I just sighed and looked at Giulietta, who was cooling off her sweat with a fan. Surely the clothes she was wearing were a bit out of date. It seemed that the Empress was not such a generous supporter. Then thank you for me. Point 1, I told Giulietta. Miss Abino's stage costume would also be great if you used ready-to-wear. I just heard that my dad is looking for someone who can wear ready-to-wear beautifully. Chapter 60. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Giulietta blinked her big eyes as if she couldn't understand what I was saying. Ah, this girl isn't a greedy person. So, she couldn't read the atmosphere and became Astana's lover, but the Empress got angry. I smiled and spoke for her in the simplest words. Is it a promotional model for a Gallihan clothing store? What? Although it is said to be the ready-to-wear clothes worn by the commoners, it is a private company in Lombardy that is clearly Gallihan's. It was also a ready-to-wear that is becoming an issue in the empire these days. Opera is not an art that deals only with the nobles. The wealthy commoners are also the main audiences of the opera. However, the amount of salary from ready-to-wear clothes is definitely lower than others. Giulietta seemed to start turning her head quickly. I quietly put fire on it. Of course, because I only heard what my father said. But the amount of sponsorship seems to be quite large. Giulietta was seen swallowing. I heard that if the results are good, you can continue to sponsor. Long-term sponsorship. Giulietta's eyes are twinkling. Perhaps Giulietta was very tired of the sponsorship of the Empress that occasionally throwing out jewelry or clothes that she did not use. It was natural that she was thirsty for more certain support. But Giulietta is already sponsored by the Empress. Someone said. Just as those who are sponsored by Lombardy are not sponsored by other families. Since ancient times, it has been customary for artists to have only one sponsorship. It was a custom made by aristocrats who liked to spend money. Ah, is that so? I said, pretending to be regretful. Then it can't be helped. Oh, no. Giulietta screamed halfway. The people around me were surprised to look back. Who can I talk to about sponsorship? You caught it. I tried to hold back the laughter that was about to come out and pretended to think for a moment. Well, I don't know. My father seems to be busy. Then I looked around and said. Oh, there you are. Claravan. It wasn't a very loud call, but Claravan walked over like a ghost. What is wrong, my lady? When Claravan, who was handsome with a unique cold atmosphere, approached, the young maiden blushed. Claravan, here Mississippi Julieta Abino. She is interested in the clothing store's promotional model. Yes. Claravan was a little embarrassed and looked at me. What the hell are you doing? We talked a few months ago about the need for a model that can change the image of ready-to-wear clothes. I said with a very bright smile. That's a public relations model. You said you're looking for someone who can show ready-to-wear, right? Yes, I'm looking for it. Fortunately, Claravan, who recognized my words, nodded sensibly. I think Julieta is interested in it. Go and talk about it. I think she is particularly interested in stage costumes. Ho, stage costume. Surely. Claravan burst into me with a moving glance contain a word of "Are you sure, Florentia?" and said sweetly to Julieta. Then let's talk over there, Mississippi Abino. Yeah. Julieta seemed to have already fallen in love with Claravan's business smile. Julieta Abino is expected to become the best star in Lambrew Empire with a crazy villain performance in a theater performance. With eyes full of madness and a song that seemed supportive, she immediately gained popularity and her shows sold out all the time. Even the clothes and accessories that Julieta wears will become an imperial fashion. Julieta Abino is the first commercial model that is perfect for the Gallahan clothing store. I glanced happily at the backs of the two who walked over to the other table, still surrounded by people. Schultz bought another estate, didn't it? I don't know how much land they have already bought. The Schultz family also prospered because they were favored by Lombardy, right? It was meant to make me feel better. I haven't even officially made my debut yet, but the aristocratic women haven't left my side. The Empress must be upset for a while since the second prince has been recognized today. Will she just feel uncomfortable? It's too bad there won't be an imperial banquet for a while. What about the first prince? I'm gonna have to keep my son away from the hunting grounds for a while. That's right, if you were to go against the first prince's will. Is this a society I've only heard of? The story of the Empress, who is not present, is also told without hesitation. People started to talk about it, maybe it's just a general thing. The people around me keep talking. At first, it was nice to hear social gossip. Now my ears were starting to hurt. We already know that the Empress and Astana have a shitty personality. Mississippi Florentia Lombardy, a new voice intervened, cut through the conversation. He was the servant of the palace. Let me take young Ae upstairs. In any banquet or where many people gather, so-called intimate groups are inevitable. So the nobles like to have a quiet conversation with the host of the banquet by calling the group to a more private place, rather than a banquet hall, and it must be upstairs today. I woke up with the envious eyes of the young people around me. Thank you for your warm hospitality today. Next time I officially make a debut, please take care of me. Oh, of course. Of course. Before that, I will often at banquets. We would be honored if you could show us your beautiful dress, Mississippi. Leaving them behind with a smile, I followed the servant. As I guessed, the servant who took me to the front of the room on the second floor said politely. Please wait a moment. I was left in the hallway with two knights guarding the door. It was then that I heard the approaching footsteps. Turn around casually to see who it is. Then looked ahead again. Oh, why is that child coming? Hey! The unfortunate voice was Astana. Now, the 14-year-old boy grew up so well that he was closer to the stupid figure I remembered. It's obvious that he's learning swordsmanship, but he's wearing a sword for self-defense and touching it like a gangster in the neighborhood. Point 7 I pretended not to hear and waited for the door to open. Hey, Half. I think he's Belsaka's mentally twin. Point 1 Even after a long time, my expressions were distorted by the words I heard. What? Your mom is just a lowly commoner, and when I call you Half, you get mad. Are you listening, Half? It's such a difficult sentence to translate, Vayu. I kept looking forward and trying to ignore him. Oh, you don't know I'm a scary prince. Until Astana grabs me by the shoulder and turns me around. The knight seemed to flinch at the prince's sudden behavior but did not intervene. They were just watching us with a nervous face. Put your hand down, your highness. Ha! I snapped coldly, and Astana smiled a really sickening grin and said. But now you've learned how to speak formally. Maybe he was talking about the time when he stepped on his hat and bounced it. It's been a long time. So let it go, right? No, I don't like that cheeky look of yours. What are you going to do, Half? This is the palace, what are you going to do? Holding my shoulder more and more painful, Astana's eyes were saying so. I hit Astana's hand hard enough to make a sound and let go. That is. A half, so what? I also put those words in my mouth. I tried to avoid getting involved with Asta as much as I could with the mind of avoiding poop. Now I felt my patience run out. And, scratch. When he grabbed my clothes, roughly silk that Laurel had carefully sewn up was ripped off from the dress. You're dead, idiot. I glared at Astana as hard as I could and then stepped back just as I grabbed his clothes. Holding it tight so that he couldn't let go of his hand that holding my clothes. Ha! Astana was seen as embarrassing and made a stupid face. It's too late, idiot. I bumped my back against the door that was still closed. Bang! With a loud sound, the closed door opened, and Astana and I pushed into the room. Tia! A startled voice of my father came from behind. And creak, there were several sounds of the chair being dragged. Now that he grasped the situation, I saw Astana turning red, and the situation behind me was drawn like a drawing. Now, then we got witnesses. When I released Astana's hand, I stumbled as if he had pushed me. This girl. Astana tried to say something unfairly, but I was first. I remember what my grandfather said. Just kick it with your feet. I am a good granddaughter who listens well to my grandfather. When I approached him, I kicked Astana's shin as hard as I could. 6 Ouch. Astana, who was hit without being able to escape, grabs his leg and doesn't know what to do. Your Majesty. One of the knights standing at the door came in surprise and supported him. However, Astana swears and pushes the knight as hard as he can, and pulls out a sword in his waist plus shurung. A sword raised with a sinister sound aimed at me. 1 I will kill you. 3 Astana shouted as if his eyes were completely turned away. However, he had to stop without taking a single step. Shurung. Another sword that suddenly appeared was precisely aimed at him. If you don't want to cut, put that sword down. It was Perez. 23 underscore 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 glossary 1 INSA. Korean abbreviation for inside. It means someone who is very popular in a group of people.